Hi everyone, this is a project I did last year, but I finally got some new video editing software so I could bring it to you. And it's a modern media console. It was a consignment from a friend of mine, and I worked up some plans. Here I'm cutting out the top of the cabinet. And again for the bottom of the cabinet. Just a rough cut, and it's not to final size just yet. Cutting it to length. And then I'm putting a rabbet on the edge to accept the sides of the case. And now I'm cutting it to its final width. After cutting it after the rabbet this way, in case there's any tear out, you can just cut it off. I put a couple more dados in for the inside walls of the cabinet. I don't go all the way to the end because these walls won't go all the way to the front of the cabinet. They're going to be a little bit recessed so the doors can go right on top of them and be flush with the outside of the cabinet. The router leaves the dados rounded on the end, and they need to be square to accept the walls. So this is just using a chisel to square up the ends of those dados. Here's a close-up view of what I was doing. Now putting some edge banding on the walls of the cabinet so that it all looks like one piece of wood. You don't see those plywood edges. Trimming up the ends. And getting them exactly flush with the box cutter. And I'm putting it all together. You can see the inside walls aren't going to go to the front, so I have a couple spacers on the floor there that will hold them up where they need to be. There's my helper, Callie. You can see there they rest on those spacers. They also don't go to the very back of the cabinet either, so we can inset the whole back of the panel of the cabinet. It got a little tricky here trying to keep everything where it was supposed to be and glue it up at the same time. All glued up, and a little bit of sanding to get it ready for the edge banding. This would be the front of the cabinet now that I'm sanding. And then flushing up the edges with the orbital sander. And here's the edge banding to again make it look like one solid piece of wood. I just tape it on in place, and then as I'm gluing it down with the iron, you take up the tape. And trimming off the excess edge banding. This part I get to, and I decide to move my fingers out of the way, you can see here, but I, hit my finger anyway. I didn't realize I'd gotten my finger at this point, so I just kept going, but then it started to feel like I had water on my hand, and I looked and found that I'd cut my finger. So this is the blood part of the project. I already had some sweat at this point into it. A little close up for you. Put a band-aid on it and get back to work. Flushing up the edges of the edge banding. This is the feet bracket for the legs of the console. Client wanted the legs gold, so I'm spray painting them here. And the carcass of the console is going to be white, so I'm painting that here. Again inside due to the heat. And now cutting the plywood for the drawers. There's going to be 6 drawers on, camera's in the way, I had to move it. It's going to be 6 drawers on this console. 3 on each side. Now cutting all the pieces to width. These are, again, the drawer sides. Now I put kind of a locking joint on the drawers so that the force applied to them by pulling them open and shut, it still keeps them locked together. This is for the bottom pieces of the drawers and the back of the whole console. Just a rough cut at first, now final width. That was the back of the console, now here's for the drawers, bottom of the drawers. When I'm cutting big pieces like that, I always like to rough cut them first, and then it's a lot easier to get them to the right size when they're more manageable and smaller. So then I just go back and cut them at the correct size. Now I should be cutting them up into 6 pieces. And putting the drawers together, you can kind of see, I think, how they lock together. And this is actually a four-corner clamp, but you could use any kind of strapping as a clamp. It doesn't have to have the little metal corners like this one does. Sometimes, in fact, I take off those corners and just use the strap, checking for square. And there's all 6 of them. Drawers, and putting on some more edge banding. I find it's a lot easier to put the edge banding on after you make the box. Otherwise, when you're making your cuts, it tends to rip the edge banding off. So after you're done with all your cuts, then put the edge banding on and trim it up. It's a lot less likely for it to get some tear out on it. And here's the drawer fronts. I don't have my radial arm saw at this point, so I'm having to make all the cuts on the table saw, which is a little hairy sometimes with such long pieces. Now I'm cutting them to their final width. I did this after I cut them up because it was just easier to get the little pieces through instead of that big long board. And these have little handles cut into them to get your fingers in there to open the drawer. So I'm rough cutting them out with the jigsaw here. I got the first one all the way to final shape and then use the router with a pattern bit on it to do the rest of them. And here are going to be the doors. There's 2 doors in the middle of the piece. So I have to glue up a panel for those 2 doors. All rough cut at this point, and they'll be cut to their final dimensions after the glue up is dry. You can't really tell here, but that blade is not at 90 degrees to the table. So I keep running it through because I didn't know, and I can't figure out why it's not coming together. But I did figure it out eventually and fixed it. For some reason I thought if I kept making cuts it would work out. This is a little jointing jig for the table saw as well to get edges nice and flat to glue together. My son comes home, and we're done for the day. New day, more work. Gluing up those panels for the doors. Always use your fingers to spread the glue, because you get to peel it off later. I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that. These are kind of old pipe clamps, and they weren't seating on the back there, so I kept turning them, but they weren't tightening, so I finally had to hold the back while I was tightening the front to keep that back piece dug into the pipe and holding, as you can see there, and finally it grabs. Scraping off some of the glue. This is a Harbor Freight plane. It's not great, so I just use it to get the glue off. You can see it even has a hard time with that. Took down some of the real high spots as well, but most of the planing on this is done with the sander. Lots of sanding. This is drilling the holes for the hinges. They're going to be European style concealed hinges. I need to make some slides for the drawers to run on. So I have some pallet wood oak here. So it's only hardwood I had to use, so cutting it into slides here. But after it's all processed, it really looks quite nice, even though it's pre-oak pallet wood. And the runners work a lot better when they're made from hardwood. And then I put on a nice show to watch while I wax every single one of those runners. This just makes the drawers slide real easy. Putting some mounting holes for the drawer slides. Now you can see all the drawer slides and where they're going. They'll be on the bottom and the top of the drawers. I'm just using a pegboard to put holes for the adjustable shelves in the two middle sections. And here's the shelves for those adjustable middle sections. So I'm going to cut two of them. Sometimes I use a tape and sometimes I don't. I didn't really see a difference on this plywood getting tear out without using the tape. So I don't know why I chose to use it sometimes and other times not. So there's one shelf, and then reusing the tape for the second shelf. Then I put a front piece on them to prevent the plywood from sagging and to also give it a thicker, more substantial appearance. This will be the front of the shelf. And at this point I got sick and needed to get this done and couldn't finish filming, so here's just a couple of pictures of the finished product and then one in place in its new home. I hope you enjoyed and thanks for watching.